Hello, I'm Tony Clement, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Boom and Bust. In a bit of a turn, Boom and Bust is examining the intersection of economics, which is our normal field of play, and cultural issues. I'm pleased to have Kate Marland joining us. She is the deputy editor of Without Diminishment, which is a Substack as well as a movement for change. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
So let's just expand on Without Diminishment. What does that title mean, and what exactly are you doing with that?
So it's a great question. The title originally came out of the motto for the province of British Columbia, which is Splendor Without Diminishment, as some of your viewers may know. The publication itself kind of came out of the fallout of the 2025 federal election. I think a lot of people were maybe not surprised by the result, but were extremely disappointed to have, be signing on for another several years of Liberal government. And so the founders of Without Diminishment, Alexander Brown, Jeffrey Russ, and Dr. Caroline Elliott, all based in BC, they kind of got together and thought, we need to have an alternative. We need to kind of take this disappointment and turn it into something good, and also perhaps take advantage of an opportunity to get into these other issues that have been typically kind of relegated to the side.
Yeah. So what is the central thesis? I did look at some of your videos from the Canada Strong and Free conference in Ottawa earlier this year, but is it basically that some issues are being overlooked right now?
Exactly. I think that the feeling has been that for probably the past kind of 20 years on the right in Canada, much of the discourse has been dominated by what we, would typically call pocketbook issues. And I think we saw this really come to a head in the 2025 federal election. A lot of the messaging was on these pocketbook issues. It was about deregulation, tax cuts, the economy. And I think we kind of saw that discussion kind of be at the expense of these other kind of more cultural issues or even immigration. And so the thesis of the publication really is that we can't let the big issues of our time be exclusively defined by pocketbook issues. We need to take kind of a head-on approach to cultural issues, to issues of immigration, of national identity, and we can't continue to kind of seed the narrative on this to the left.
So, I mean, when pollsters do their polls, it is typically pocketbook issues that rule the roost. But are you saying there's kind of these underlying issues that are not being picked up by pollsters, or what's your point of view on that?
Well, I think you're exactly correct in that for most average Canadians, the most pressing issues to them are issues of the economy, right? They're worried about getting food on the table. They're worried about paying for gas, affording their kids' necessities of life. Um, but at the end of the day, our argument is that cultural issues are economic issues, right? Like we are
Right.
facing a kind of crisis of affordability in this country that could partially stem from the fact that we aren't tapping into our natural resources. And I would say that to get at those natural resources, we need to change the culture around that issue, right? The reason we're losing the natural resources isn't, solely regulation. It's because we elect governments
Mm.
because of the cultural distaste for doing these kind of things.
Yeah, and I guess the one area where it's very clearly both issues simultaneously is the immigration issue. So, talk a little bit about that.
So, I mean, I think that it's pretty clear at this point that there's been some a wrong direction taken on immigration when it comes to kind of questions of assimilation. We all kind of lambasted Kelly Leach back in the day for her Canadian values test, but I think that kind of 10 years down the line, she was probably making a good point. And one of our co-founders, Dr. Caroline Elliott, has kind of came out in defense of Kelly Leach and said, she really had a point because at a certain point, the importation of of temporary foreign workers and the impact of that on the labor force, that does have an economic component to it, but you can't kind of condemn that solely from an economic framework because it does boost our GDP. To combat the temporary foreign worker program, you need to necessarily have this kind of cultural element and say, okay, what does it mean to kind
Mhm.
of inject these extra people into the workforce? How do we assimilate them to Canadian values? Do they share our national identity and pride?
Yeah, and I want to delve into this a little bit more deeply, Kate. We are going to take a little bit of a break for our commercials, but we'll be back with you as our guest after these short commercial messages. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I have as my guest Kate Marland, Deputy Editor of Without Diminishment. Kate, we were just having a conversation about the immigration issues. Obviously, there's an economic component, there's a national identity component. And I think you or your co-founder made a point about, Tim Hortons, making this grandiose announcement that they were no longer accepting TFWs, temporary foreign workers. And I think your point was a little bit skeptical that that this was just an act of generosity on their part. Maybe use that as an example of how this debate is working.
Yes, well, if you are curious about this issue, we have some wonderful articles on the Tim Hortons of it all. But I think that the key point here is that, Tim Hortons comes out and says, "Oh, we're going to hire 10,000 workers locally." What does that even mean? They're not saying, "Oh, we're going to hire 10,000 Canadian citizens." They're
Mm.
doing kind of like a word play to get around and maybe like get some positive press for them after all of these issues that they've been facing. They see Dunkin' Donuts maybe coming into the market. They're trying to position themselves well to combat that. But at the end of the day, this is a great illustration of why we can't really make a purely economic argument as to why the programs like the temporary foreign workers program or importing this foreign labor doesn't work, right? If you care purely about the GDP going up, it necessarily makes sense that importing more labor, we need more cheap labor so that we can allow these companies to make more money to boost our GDP. And so it really requires us to kind of depart from that conventional framing to then say, what does this really mean for our society? And I think a really big point that we try and make it without diminishment is that, our young people are feeling extremely disenfranchised. If you talk to young people, I know you've talked about this on your show, right? Like young
Mhm,
people are
mhm.
feeling extremely kind of disillusioned entering the job market, trying to afford homes. Like at every turn, they're kind of like, okay, I feel like society has left me behind. And to kind of just prioritize GDP growth over the kind of lives and the creation of beautiful lives for our citizens, surely that can't be the way forward.
And is that also an intergenerational debate too? Because obviously, baby boomers, et cetera, don't appear to be taking this issue of youth disillusionment and marginalizing of youth. Doesn't seem to be on their radar. Is that your take on it too?
I think it's easy to come to that conclusion when you see, the kind of breakdown in the polling between, it's primarily older generations, kind of elbows up, people voting for Carney, who are typically more, supportive of his ruling. But at the end of the day, I would say a lot of the support we've received for the publication and for these ideas is also from people of the, boomer
Great.
generation.
Yeah.
There
Wow.
is certainly a generational divide, but uh, I don't think it can be pinned entirely on that. I would say that the key thing is that I think people are increasingly realizing across the generational divide that it's no longer a matter of like, well, you young people are just lazy and you don't work hard enough and you need to pick yourself up from your bootstraps. It's like we imported
Mhm.
millions of people, working age people into this country through various different programs. We destabilized society. We said that we are going to intentionally erase Canada's heritage through deliberate actions like the removal of statues. And then we kind of throw our hands in the air and say, oh, well, why are young people so disillusioned? Why are they upset? Why is there a generational divide? And it's like we have to be addressing these issues. There's no invisible hand that is going to kind
Right.
of solve this issue for young Canadians.
Right. So you're not saying you're against all immigration, but it's also a question of integrating newcomers to our society. Is that part of the argument you're making?
Exactly. Right? Yeah. There are plenty of people who have come to this country and made great contributions and who have assimilated well to our society. And I would never, ever be the person that would advocate to send those people back. I think that there is kind of a nefarious force that has taken hold that
Mhm.
is kind of putting forward this ideology. I think it's important to be very clear that, the issue is one of that we've ceded the ground on with our perception of heritage. We've
Right.
ceded the ground on our national identity and patriotism. And so that's kind of on us to say we didn't give them anything to assimilate to.
Right. So you're when you're saying that to fellow conservatives. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've been arm in arm with the left on this.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Kate, we're going to take another brief break, but there's certainly lots more to talk about. We'll be back after these commercial messages. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. My guest is Kate Marland. She is the deputy editor of Without Diminishment, which you can find on Substack. Is that right?
That's correct. We are on
Okay, good.
Substack. We are also on YouTube. So
Okay. Yeah, you've got some videos posted on YouTube. Absolutely. So I want to just sort of, we've been talking about immigration, but I think there are other cultural issues that intersect with it, economic issues. And one of the ones that comes to mind generally as a framework is the whole debate over DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that has been adopted not only in academic circles and government circles, but also in big corporate circles as well. So, do you have any thoughts on where we are in terms of DEI?
well, I mean, I think that this is a kind of perfect example of where, for those of us on the right, we've really ceded the narrative to the left and kind of just gone along with it, right? I think you kind of saw this come into play with this kind of conceptualization that conservatives should really try and be like more kind-hearted. They should position themselves as, nice and not trying to cause a stir in order to maybe get power in that way. And it just fundamentally has led us to a place that is unworkable, right? We
Mhm, mhm.
have a situation now where we have these DEI programs in place and this kind of culture of DEI too that is kind of external of the actual infrastructure that enforces it. Um, that has kind of made merit irrelevant. And I think that we're really seeing the kind of destructive force of that rhetoric and that cultural shift.
Yeah, I mean, it originally came from academic circles, but the whole idea of merit as being a colonizing force means that if you have merit, then you are automatically demerited from a job position. Is that the kind of thing you're monitoring and commenting on?
Exactly, and I think you see this play out in all sorts of different things. For me personally, I did my graduate studies at Ryerson University, as it was known at the time, right around the time that they were kind of about to change the name of the institution,
Mhm.
and kind of all of these issues were coming to light. And I think that it was clear through my experience in graduate school that it was not a merit based system that we were operating in. It was not concerned with academic rigor or, elevating the best ideas. It was really what kind of weird concept can you come up with for a project that we can then throw funding into?
Mhm, mhm.
Colleagues of mine were, doing an intersectional study of the video game Zelda. It's like, how does this help Canadian society? It doesn't. But if we're just kind of relentlessly progressing towards, we run out of ideas eventually.
Yeah.
But these are the kind of projects that would receive funding, and I think organizations like the Canadian Taxpayers Federation do great work, kind of uncovering the crazy graduate projects that get funding from the government. And it's kind of important to really bring those to light to illustrate the ludicrous nature of this.
Do you think that things are turning around a little bit, that your argument that you're pursuing at Without Diminishment and other people, other actors, that there's been a turning point yet on some of these issues? I note that statues of Sir John A. Macdonald are reappearing again in certain municipalities and at Queen's Park here in the Toronto area. So is that your sense of things, or is there still a long way to go?
So I think there's kind of two things. I think on the one hand, there is a lot of positive momentum. I would point to the recent BC Conservative leadership race, where
Mhm.
the new leader, Carrie Lynn Findlay, started out her campaign kind of primarily framing it as tax cut issues, pocketbook stuff, and then you see her win, and she's been framing it as faith, family, and freedom. You saw
Mhm.
that that was kind of a clear pivot in her campaign to kind of address more of these like cultural spiritual identity issues that, and you saw her win with that message. So I think that that is a really positive indication that there has been a vibe shift. But then you see the city of Aurelia voting to take down the Samuel de Champlain statue just
Mhm.
recently. So
Mhm. Mhm.
and that's an area that has elected, conservative MPs, conservative MPPs. Um,
Right.
and so, it's like there's positives and there's negatives. I wouldn't say that we're winning yet, but we are certainly kind of on the path to winning.
It's interesting, and obviously you're based in British Columbia, correct? And
That's correct.
yeah, and British Columbia, I want to talk about this in our next segment, but British Columbia really is the pointy end of the stick on a lot of these cultural, if I can call them that, cultural issues. Has been for a while. So let's hold that thought. I want to have a complete discussion about it in the next segment. We'll be back with our guest Kate Marland after these commercial messages. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Kate Marland. She is the deputy editor of Without Diminishment, which you can find on YouTube and on Substack. Kate, I was just bringing it down to your, obviously, where you live in British province of British Columbia, and that's where your organization was founded as well. And I was making the point that British Columbia always seems to be the place where the stick is the pointiest when it comes to some of these cultural issues. We saw recently the BC Supreme Court with its decision on property rights being diminished in favor of Indigenous rights. So all of these things seem to be boiling up and bubbling up. And you also mentioned the latest BC Conservative leadership race, which was won by my former colleague, Carrie Lynn Finley. So yeah, give us a little bit of a sense of what's happening in British Columbia.
So I think that part of the reason that we can kind of see British Columbia as sort of conservatism's new frontier in
Mhm.
Canada is really because the issues that are facing the province are kind of cultural in their root. If you look at the property rights issue, I mean, that is a cultural issue. It comes from a cultural problem, right? This cultural belief that we as Canadians are settlers on colonized land, we've stolen the land and it needs to go back. You don't get to DRIPA, you don't get to the Cowichan decision without that cultural milieu. And so there's no economic solution to this property rights issue that we can get anywhere with if we don't kind of shift that culture. And now the kind of silver lining of the Cowichan decision is that it's awakened a lot of people to this deep cultural institutional rot. And I think it's also really opened the eyes of a lot of conservatives that we can no longer keep kind of furthering this myth that institutions are neutral. Institutions will always kind of impart the ideology of the people that we put in charge of it. And so as conservatives, we are typically kind of like, oh, well, we want to just, get rid of government institutions and it doesn't really matter the people that are in there and the ideology of the public service like shouldn't matter. And it's like these are actually really important things. And I think that
Mhm.
hopefully we can see in British Columbia kind of shift in this attitude to kind of take a much more assertive stance and say, we're no longer going to tolerate this type of ideology pervasive in our schools, our institutions.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about the left in the province too, because I'm old enough to remember when the left in British Columbia was primarily an economic left. That is to say, they were interested in class issues, they were interested in pocketbook issues, the redistribution of wealth issues. Unionized forces were very strong in BC. That seems to have all vaporized now. A lot of blue collar voters are voting conservative now, unionized voters, and it's all about identity politics on the left. Is that a caricature or is that accurate?
I would say it's fairly accurate. It's easy if you run mostly in conservative circles to stay above the fray of how bad it actually is. But my sister and brother-in-law are both teachers in the school system here, and the tales that they report are just absolutely ludicrous. If you talk to anyone who's gone to teachers college at the University of British Columbia, I mean, you just would be truly jaw on the floor at how deeply this ideology has become pervasive throughout these institutions. And so it's no wonder that we churn out, hardcore ideologues. And Many have referred to the NDP of British Columbia as, kind of like mud hut party, right? They've gone back to this very kind of primitive ideology that puts down kind of the human ability to kind of like be entrepreneurial and to live good quality of life in service of, this kind of fraudulent ideology that helps no one.
So in 40 seconds, let's turn back to the Conservatives for a second. What do Conservatives have to do, in your opinion?
I think the real key is to just acknowledge that it's not really like a partisan struggle necessarily, but it's a struggle between those who believe in fighting for the future of Western civilization and those who are willing to kind of cede the narrative to play nice. We need to be intentional about how we aim to take power and to take that power and wield it, and not be afraid to kind of reformat these institutions in the image that we think that they should be, and be the champions of Western civilization and the champions of the values that Canada was founded on. So we just need to be unafraid and have the stomach to do it.
Kate Marland, it's been great having you on the program. We really appreciate it, and good luck with your movement too.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was Kate Marland, Without Diminishment, and clearly interesting proposals on how to continue and enhance the debate of public policy in this country. Thanks for watching today.